Now, the first theme is the element of naturalism. Povera were important as not a sort of romantic, we want to go back to nature. It was a re-examining of the natural in the face of the post-industrial society. They didn't want to abandon post-industrial society. They loved post-industrial society. They loved consumer society. But there was this desire to reconnect with the natural world, and there was an awareness that this was connected in terms of the 17th century tradition of naturalism, more of the Baroque avant-garde that I'd like to call, I hate that term avant-garde, of artists like Rembrandt and Caravaggio, who were often criticized for being too naturalistic. You know, that Rembrandt criticized for using washerwomen to represent nude Venuses. You know, it's somewhat problematic. So the theme of nature, I'm going to go through these relatively quickly, is a dominant one. Giovanni Anselmo's sculpture that is from '68, which the beauty that there is, and this is a little aside, a critique of the museum culture, because as a curator you have to replace the lettuce every day because it's just going to wilt and one piece of granite's going to fall off. So in other words, to ensure the survival of this work, it has to be fed. Otherwise it simply falls apart. So, you know, and which is a disappointment. Cunels has a number of works with birds on them, with fire, and there was a wonderful retrospective at the Tate and the Walker Art Gallery, and none of the works were allowed to have the bird on it or the fire for insurance purposes, which, you know, it's, well, the point of Povera is still being made, that the museum kills. You know, the museum is a site of artistic murder for them. Cunels does this famous exhibition of 12 horses in 1968 in Rome, you know, which obviously threw off the viewers in terms of walking into the space and all of a sudden, you know, having to deal with horse shit and all the various smells that this would have generated, which is just, you know, most gallery spaces are relatively smell neutral. So it's certainly tied into this naturalistic revival. And Pascali's 1 cubic meter of earth of 1967, which was part of a show in '67 that Germano Solant, the curator that brought these artists together, was based on creating work from elements that were essentially formless. You know, which always reminds me of Michel de Montaigne's description of the Baroque as trying to grasp at water. You know, and the possibility of that, or a description of the internet was the internet, getting information from the internet is like trying to get a sip of water from a fire hydrant. You know, it's just practically impossible. And in fact, Pascali does this wonderful piece of 32 square meters of sea, which is sculpting water. And as we all know, water is obviously a very important you know, symbol, metaphor for the Baroque, and they were certainly aware of this in terms of creating these works. Unfortunately, with Pascali, he died in a motorcycle accident in '68 and had some rather interesting directions to take. Yeah, he was a big fanatic of motorcycles with a nasty crash that ended his life in '68. So his associate, I mean, a lot of the Povera artists I'm showing you continue, well, a lot of them are starting to die off. Mario Merz just recently passed away. Fabro is still alive. Panoni, Giuseppe Panoni is still alive, but that generation is slowly moving on. But Pascali's life was taken rather early. And Giuseppe Panoni, who actually is the one from not from the industrial center, and he does this series of performances called Maritime Alps of 1968, which still survive today, which he still revisits because there is part of the project is to go back and add elements to the work every year and represent a sort of association or reconnection with the natural world. Now, the other element that comes in that's Baroque influence is this idea of the classifying impulse, which is this need to order the world, yet with this sense as well that ordering is to a certain extent sort of doomed to fail because of what is being measured. And Algero e Boetti, which Algero e Boetti, I know it means and Boetti, but in fact it's Algero Boetti is one person, the middle initial means and, but I'll explain to you why that comes in. But with his partner, Marie Suzo Boeri, created this massive tapestry that was put together by Afghan weavers called Classifying the 1,000 Longest Rivers in the World of 1977. And well, you can't see it in this detail, but you literally have stitched in the 1,000 longest rivers with their measurement, with their length on it. So obviously beginning with the Nile is number one, which you wouldn't be able to see. The beauty that there was an accompanying text with it, which represented their research, because as they soon discovered and as they had hoped, there is a lot of disagreement about what position, what rank some of these rivers hold, let alone how do you measure a river. Which, things like the Yangtze River, for example, during heavy flood season can change its course like 200 miles. And that was part of the point of the project, was to indicate sort of absurdity. And yet this need on our part to measure things, even though some things simply go beyond the possibility of even conceiving them, being measured. And the discolorations are simply because all of the fabric was hand dyed, and someone had expressed to Boetti, well, isn't it a concern for you that it's not all uniform green? It's, no, it's perfect. I mean, it continues this particular theme of this undermining this type of classifying impulse. But he doesn't reject it. I mean, it is an impulse we have, and it is an impulse for him that the Baroque definitely recognized, in which he connects the Baroque with this famous piece of his in 1969, which is based on Vivaldi's opus on the risk of harmony and invention, which the Four Seasons are part of. Four Seasons always, unfortunately, get played individually, yet they're part of a larger whole. And this involved Boetti taking 25 sheets of lined paper and redrawing them by hand. So, you have measured the calculated and then the hand-drawn type of gesture on the top of that. Now, the classifying impulse is also going to be important for Fabro with this habitat, which is to sort of redraw rather quirky perspective tracing of a physical space, a physical room with these wonderful little wire extensions with these tangent circles on them, balancing very gently in this space. So, it's this distorting. One would almost want to say manners, but the manners themselves, I mean, use perspective quite professionally and quite well. It's just that they reverse it to a certain extent. But it is meant to do, again, this sort of unstabling or unhinging of the sort of perfection of geometry, which obviously drew him to Pascal as well. Now, the other key theme that comes in is the element of time, the movement of metamorphosis. I've collapsed all of these largely through necessity of time. That's everyone. Anyway. Boetti does this wonderful piece, and this is more just a signal. This section called Time, which has a drawing of a watch, a real watch, but then the whole thing is photographed. So you've got time that's suspended in the drawing with real time in terms of physical object of the watch, but then the whole thing being photographed, which then adds yet another layer to all of this. And Proteus, which we mentioned, and Giulio Paolini does his Proteus 1, 2, and 3 of 1971. So if there's any doubt where this idea of metamorphosis and change is coming about, Paolini in this case is really underscoring the fact that we're looking at the Baroque in terms of some of these issues with these works. And then Calzolari, who the element of change or metamorphosis comes in terms of his use of materials. This, in fact, is a lead plate with the letters inscribed on it in lead as well. And you've got a flute, and the lead itself refrigerated. So what you're seeing as white is the formation of ice crystals on this plate, and it's also sitting on a sheet of lead. And Calzolari is quite intentionally referring to the alchemical meaning of lead, and sort of symbol is a transformative starting point.
It's a Saturnian metal.
Yeah. It was a great book by Wittauer and his wife. Right? Yeah. So and the work only exists as long as the refrigeration unit is on. When it's turned off, it dissolves. It falls apart in a sense. And he does like working with water and ice. And so one way to be able to sculpt water. Because the other thing I found with the Povera is their themes aren't all being drawn from the visual arts. They're reading a lot of Baroque literature as well. And so some of the subject matter that they're addressing, like the Proteus, is not necessarily a strong visual subject for painters, but it is a very popular theme for playwrights during the Baroque period, and the Povera are definitely reading the literature, not just the artist's visual production.